Travel with brave Julian, lucky Philip, and gentle Kevin on their quest through a land full of vicious monsters, enchanted princesses, fearsome dragons, and even a kindly old woodcutter or two. A game that is beyond belief. A world that will take you weeks to explore, let alone conquer. Your journey will take you to underground mazes, caverns, forests, deserts, snow-covered mountains, lakes, castles, villages, even the astral world. An Amiga original, which was developed largely through the work of one man, Talon. We may come across the name David Joyner in our looks at the past. Know that these are the same person. He prefers Talon. It was published by Micro Illusions, I would say, in the spring of 1987 in America, and DSC game 60 Hz with a 4:3 aspect ratio. Ports would be released for a few systems in the coming years. A cursory glance says 1988 for the Commodore 64, 89 for DOS, and 1991 for the Sega Genesis. Today, we'll be covering the Fairy Tale Adventure in its original release on the Amiga. We'll start off taking a look at the story featured in the manual. Once upon a time, a land far away, there lived three young men. Brothers they were, and they lived with their father, who was their tiny village's master at arms. Julian would pursue games of battle by fancying himself as a great warrior or an admiral on the high seas. Philip was often found engaged with the townsfolk, either trading sharp wit or gambling at dice. He had a knack for always getting what he wanted. Kevin found delight in wandering through local fields and glens, his head filled with vivid imaginations. One night, as the village lay asleep, a strange, mysterious thing occurred. An eerie chill passed through the timbers of the small town, and people shivered in their beds unexpectedly as a long, inhuman wailing was heard coming from the street. They saw a dark, hooded figure apparently floating above the ground as it moved through the middle of the village. As the folk watched, a cold seemed to pull at their spirits, draining away their vital energy. Behind the dark figure, marching in ranks, was an army of dead corpses and animated skeletons. Armed with swords and maces, they began performing some hideous ritual, which lasted till dawn. The mayor was puzzled over the night's events, because for many years the village had kept within their tiny shrine a powerful talisman against such evil spirits. The talisman was a small carving of a bull, which was believed to have a spirit that was too strong for any undead creature to endure. The question was soon answered, however, when it was discovered that the talisman had disappeared. It had been stolen from its shrine. The mayor faced the father of the three boys and said, "As master-at-arms, you must get help. Go swiftly to the city of Merim and request aid of the king. If the king cannot help, seek the guidance of the Red Knight. He is the protector to our land and will be able to defend us." We'll be circling back to the story, but I wanted to first get a little bit into the gameplay. I would call the Fairy Tale Adventure an action RPG, but this was really before that genre was even a thing. This game predates The Legend of Zelda in America. And it's not that Zelda was the first action RPG. You could probably go back and say something like the Temple of Apache or sort of Fargo were action RPGs back in the early 80s. But Zelda was the one that many would draw influence from going forward. Chris Roberts claims Times of Lore was influenced by Zelda. Times of Lore, 1988. The Legend of Zelda, August 22nd, 1987 is when it was released in America. The first reviews for this game came out in July of 87, setting it up for a spring release. Of course, Zelda had been out since early 1986 in Japan, but I think it's safe to say that the Fairy Tale Adventure was thought up independently from Zelda, unlike many games going forward. And for that, it is of note in terms of its gameplay. It is of note in terms of its graphics as well. It looks a little better than Zelda, doesn't it? Looks better than Times of Lore. Hell, it's on par with Ultima VII from 1992. And as you've witnessed several deaths to this point, you can see it's very much a computer game of the 1980s. It's a hard one when you're first starting out. I probably put this game in the Amiga 5 times since 2015 in an attempt to get somewhere, wander around, died, and then I'd put it away. That doesn't mean it's not worth playing. A lot of RPGs are like that. It's still my favorite genre. It means you put it on, see if today's the day it grabs you. This time, it did. And I'm glad it did. It's absolutely a game that is worth playing. So let's dive in and see if others agreed back in the day. Dragon Magazine, April 1988. Receiving 4.5 out of 5 stars, the superior graphics and sound capabilities of the Amiga have lent elegance to this fantasy game, wherein 3 brothers attempt to find a special weapon to defeat an evil necromancer. The visuals are absolutely stunning, and the play is exciting. We think the Amiga version is more than worthwhile for any Amiga gamer. And as the game transitions tonight, let's talk a little more about the graphics. Effectively hundreds, if not thousands, of colors when you factor in that palette cycling. I would say the game gets ridiculously dark at night, but it is graphically stunning to watch it. You know, this game came out for the Commodore 64 and DOS, and obviously those versions aren't going to impress graphically like on the Amiga, but it also came out on the Genesis, and for the most part, that is a very faithful translation from the Amiga. But even on the Genesis, it can't go into the night like the Amiga. It's just going to compete with that 4096 color palette. Although they all do reach that annoyingly too dark range, which I wish they wouldn't. Now, beyond the cycling of the palette to utilize those extra colors, we're probably looking at a 32 color Amiga game, which might even change depending on your current location. So if you're in a forest, you have a certain palette. You go over to a winter area, you have a different one, so more colors there as well, possibly. It is also my feeling that the Amiga version is utilizing 2 separate resolutions on screen at the same time, with the top being 320 by 200 low resolution and the menu area being 640 by 200 medium/high res. Now, what makes me say this is comparing it with the DOS version, which we have on screen with us now. You'll notice that the menus are a little more cramped on DOS. That's not because they chose a bigger font, it's because the resolution is smaller and it can't fit. You might see it better by looking at the compasses. If the DOS version could have ported that over one for one, it would have, like they did for the top part of the screen. The fact that they altered it means there's something about the Amiga version that it could not replicate. And I would imagine it's because that's a different resolution on the Amiga. So not only was the Amiga bettering the 1989 PC in 1987, it's still bettering the PC because to this day, the PC cannot put 2 separate resolutions in a full screen at the same time. It's some impressive stuff graphically, I have to say, as well as musically. We're not dealing with that PC speaker. July 1987 info. So who's got their Commodore suspenders? It sure as hell won't ever be me. Some Commodore news from the time period. Bally has licensed Amiga technology for use in their coin-op video games. Besides the previously announced Moonquake, Bally now says they will be producing Amiga Tech arcade versions of Boulder Dash, Road Wars, and Firelord. Grand Products will be using the Amiga boards for a submarine combat game called Upscope, and Mastertronic will be incorporating Amiga boards into their Arcadia game line. The new arcade machines will essentially be standard Amigas with ROM game cartridges built in. This marks a definite first in the electronic gaming industry. Coin-op manufacturers coming to a personal computer company for the latest in gaming technology. We have an advertisement for the Fairy Tale Adventure, along with Discovery, the first ever review I did on my channel, and the unreleased Vaporware Land of Legends. Receiving 5 out of 5 stars, the folks at Micro Illusions finally have a major hit on their hands. Fairy Tale is far and away the finest dungeon adventure game ever rendered in the microcomputer media. Impeccable and richly detailed animated graphics create an instant fascination, while thoughtful implementation of actions, cause, and effect produce a tangible sense of reality that will have your heart pounding. Over 18,000 smooth-scrolling screens, some hidden, will keep gamers contentedly busy. Even the game's designers take a reported 14 hours to win this game. Superb. Ben Dunnington. And it really does show off the power of the Amiga in 1987 when you compare all of these screenshots to the straightest of DOS ports from Sierra. Space Quest there. Still a good game, but man, was Sierra out of their league. So with their mention of 18,000 smooth-scrolling screens, let's talk about the world. It is certainly big, although difficult to verify the actual number of screens when a game is scrolling. And of those screens, there would be a certain percentage of those which would be best described as useless land or ocean, but nevertheless, it is a massive world. 18,000 screens in this one, 13,000 in Times of Lore released over a year later. You've been watching me explore the immediate areas around Tambry. We saw those monoliths earlier. That was T1. I am now to the east of 2, which is not actually on the map. These are my own handwritten notes. An hour, if not more, of just exploring the coastlines around your starting location. This map, along with its in-game magical system counterpart, essential to getting anywhere. You might come across a note in-game which tells you to find the turtle. Well, you could look at your map and see that there's a turtle point. Might be relevant, although I actually found the turtle in a different way. Through exploration, there is a shell at number 8. When you use the shell, it summons the turtle straight to you. So multiple ways for some of these things to be solved. Excellent. I really loved exploring this game. Just when it might be bordering on getting tedious, well, that's when you'd find a chest or you'd enter a new geographic area like the snow-covered mountains or a swamp. I'd say it's the strongest feature of the game, its exploration. As we journey to the king, let's get back to the story. A week passed, and the Master-at-Arms did not return. The village was decimated by repeated attacks by the goblin men. Eventually, he did return, staggering into town, barely able to keep his feet. He had taken a serious belly wound, as well as blows to the head. The brothers helped their father into the cottage and onto his bed to nurse his wounds. "My sons, I have little time left, and much to tell. An evil necromancer has threatened to destroy all unless we submit to his will and pay tribute. The king cannot help us. His daughter has been kidnapped, and he is afraid to act lest she be tortured and killed." "What of the Red Knight?" asked Julian. "The Knight of Vermilion cannot be found. It is feared he is slain." "Please don't die, father. What can we do?" asked Kevin. "I'm afraid I cannot grant your first request. I can do nothing, but perhaps you can." Many centuries ago, events similar to these were prophesied by Malbereth the Seer. The prophecy describes 7 quests that must be completed in order to defeat the enemy. You must find the weapon that will destroy him. You must find his stronghold. You must pass the barriers, each of which will require a special token. You must retrieve the talisman, for I know that he keeps it with him at all times. There is more that you must do, but I know it not. Perhaps you may receive the advice along the way. Go to the chest near the bed. There are some gold coins. Divide them among yourselves. Now I must say goodbye, my sons. May you have food, fortune, and a good life. When the Master-at-Arms finished these sayings, his spirit departed. By no means an original story, but it kind of comes with the territory of fairy tales, and it's done well enough. There really isn't much more story told in-game. What little the NPCs have to say usually pertain to clues, and those are done excellently. If you get stuck in this game, just keep exploring. You'll either stumble into the solution, or you'll come across somebody who might say something like, "Seek the place that is darker than night. There you shall find your goal in sight." He's talking about the astral world, conveniently found near the Black Mountains. Those are good clues. As for the story focusing on the 3 brothers, it's an interesting way to deal with lives. When Julian dies, he will lose 5 luck, and a fairy will come and resurrect him. If there is no more luck, he's gone, and you resume the game as Philip. Now, he actually starts the game with more luck, so he'll live longer, but should it get to 0, Philip will die, and you will resume as Kevin. If Kevin's luck gets to 0, the game is over. Each brother starts with a particular strength, so Philip with the aforementioned luck, Julian starts with more bravery, Kevin with kindness. What kindness actually does in this game, I really have no idea. Perhaps people will just take pity on you and give you a quest item, but I don't know. Any of the brothers can win the game, but the most important stats are bravery and vitality. Bravery is your strength and vitality is your health, both of which are increased by killing things. If I was to die as Julian right now and start as Philip, those stats get reset. Now you can get all of your items back by gruesomely digging through your dead brother's bones, but you will have to grind and get those bravery and vitality stats back up. So in practice, you're just going to treat the game as any other RPG. Save and then load when you die, which in the end makes the brothers rather pointless. Now, having said that, I kind of wish I had followed the intended system. I felt like the combat had become too easy as the game progressed. Perhaps the reason this occurred was because the combat was too hard in the beginning. Now, in a normal RPG, when you find an area is difficult in combat, you have two choices, really. Go somewhere else and see if the encounters are easier, won't do you any good in this game, or you grind. I kept expecting to come across more difficult monsters, but other than the bosses, they're all the same throughout the entire game. Still, perhaps I did do the right thing, because you'll notice that they're still wearing me down with a vitality of 15. I'm right on the cusp of dying even now. And really, in an action RPG, while combat needs to be there, it does not have to be the focus. How many hits does it take to kill something in Zelda? For most monsters, 2, maybe just 1 if you charge the weapon beforehand. It's easy, and that's fine. You don't want to bog yourself down with combat in a game like this. Back to Info November 1987. The First, The Best, a short history of Commodore 64 and Amiga games. Micro Illusions delivered fairy tale adventure to hungry gamers, and it received lots of praise for its great graphics and incredible depth and detail, though Temple of Apache and others have been ported to the Amiga and were very well done. Fairy Tale set new standards. Ahead 2 years, November 89. Classified as an adventure here, although also with games like Dungeon Master, Clear RPGs, the third best Amiga adventure. Fairy Tale Adventure was the first great full graphic adventure for the Amiga. Amazing Computing, August of 1987. The Amiga 500 has made it to market. In mid-June, dealers got their first shipment, and by all accounts, the initial shipment sold out. Micro Illusions Fairy Tale Adventure is a groundbreaking game available only for the Amiga. It features an excellent user interface, a proper storyline, and graphic advancements that could only be done on our favorite graphics engine. There is one word for Fairy Tale Adventure. Huge. I mean, it's really big. Take big, multiply it by whopping, and take that to the stupendous power. And it is beautiful. So what's so special about the graphics in Fairy Tale Adventure? Well, take smooth scrolling animation, gorgeous rendering of such difficult things as snow-capped mountains and night falls, and then accent these images with near-perfect perspective. Add in the fact that there are no regions, no false areas that can be seen but not entered. Top it all off with a soundtrack that is both nice to listen to and useful. What more could a gamer ask for? Very little. Fairy Tale Adventure is, quite simply, the most innovative, unique, and wonderful adventure game on the Amiga. It is clear that Fairy Tale Adventure is the next generation of Ultima. See Ultima VII several years later if you have any doubts. This is the game that Defender of the Crown should have been, but wasn't. The graphics are that good. Remember Zaxxon? That sort of angle, 3D perspective on reality with shadows? That's what Fairy Tale Adventure has got. You're not looking directly down, but rather down, forward, and slightly to the left. This turns a map into reality, as all the features suddenly take on depth. Shadowing is done so nicely, too. It may seem like a small thing, but to those who have watched this industry grow from infancy, shadows are impressive. All buildings are the same size, inside and out. Towns are not just a pattern on the map to be entered, but actually real walled cities to be walked around until an entrance is found. Any complaints are paled in light of what a beautiful and fun game Fairy Tale Adventure is. Just when you think you've seen everything, you discover a little tavern or a log cabin in some off-the-beaten-path type of place. The soundtrack kept surprising us with new tunes. And then there's the challenge of your final battle against the evil necromancer. What a climax. Fairy Tale Adventure is a game your whole family can enjoy. Adults will find it challenging, while young people will find it delightful. Everyone will find it fun. It truly is a step ahead for the gaming industry. One can only hope for a Fairy Tale Adventure 2, and soon. Now, I wasn't a fan of how the reviewer focused on putting down games from the past in order to bolster this one. Defender of the Crown is a classic, and I wouldn't want it any other way. Other games were mentioned, like Bard's Tale as well. Do you really not have enough awesome things to say about this game that you have to focus on other ones? Now, I have been mentioning Ultima VII and Times of Lore, but that is because they came after this one. Those are awesome games, and isn't it so cool that there was something that came before it, but it doesn't get a lot of credit? I would like to talk about the perspective a little more, which they got into, calling it Zaxxon-like. It's not really Zaxxon-like, or Marble Madness-like, if you'd like to get a little closer to the actual time period this game came out. Those games are isometric views. The Fairy Tale Adventure is not quite isometric. I'd call it pseudo-isometric. I think Talon called it an oblique perspective. It's something which comes off both looking good and awkward at the same time. Certain things are bird's eye, completely looking down. The roofs, the beds there, the floors. But then you have things like the tables, the cabinets, the walls. Those have a isometric kind of look, so they combine for this pseudo-isometric kind of feeling, which works, absolutely, but is a little awkward. I'd prefer a completely isometric look, but there were many games at the time and going forward which used this kind of combined look as well. Amazing Computing, over 10 years later, February 1998. In a piece focusing on the career of Bill Williams, the game Sinbad gets mentioned. The music is simply incredible, along with the themes in Fairy Tale Adventure, some of the best ever to grace a computer game. Questbusters, January 1988. I figured out how to get into the throne room, what to do with the Jade Skull, and where to find a pile of gold, but can't begin to unravel the biggest puzzle in Fairy Tale Adventure. How does such a great role-playing game get stuck with such a gimpy name? Instead of emulating the classic interfaces popularized by Ultima and Wizardry, programmer, designer, musician David Joyner invented a wholly new game system that works wonderfully on the Amiga. Houses, castles, barns, and assorted structures are shown in a distinctive 3D perspective that makes the most of the Amiga's graphic capabilities. Most living spaces are furnished in extravagant detail. Outside, I wandered through rows of wheat, bright flowing streams, forests, deserts, watchtowers, tombs, graveyards, mountains, and grasslands. Monsters are the most detailed and best animated I've yet encountered. Combat is intensified by the thwunk of arrows striking home, the clank and clatter of steel. My sole complaint is that you have to wait for that fairy to flutter out and revive you after being killed before you can load a save game. The best animated role-playing game yet for Amiga, Fairy Tale Adventure has a captivating game design, superb animation and graphics, and well-done sound effects and music. I also like the original twist of having 3 lives for each brother, then assuming a new role as the next brother. It's accessible enough for beginners, yet inventive enough to satisfy the most battle-hardened veteran. Highly recommended. Welcome to my hell, Grimwood Forest. Oh, is that a dead end I've reached after I spent an hour traveling through this maze? I hope you picked up an inventory full of jewels before you entered this thing, because you're going to be spending many nights here, using all of them in an attempt to see. And I suppose that segues well into a discussion of the magical system used in the Fairy Tale Adventure, which consists of one-time use items. The most important ones from my perspective are jewels, which lets you see at night, totems, which give you a bird's eye view of your surrounding area, and vials, which restore your health. But there are also other items like the orb, which lets you see secret doors, the stone, which allows you to travel through the monoliths, and the jade skull, which immediately kills all the weaker monsters on screen. You acquire these along with keys by killing enemies, searching through chests, and some can even be purchased at a store. And this aspect actually makes the economy work decently. You can buy weapons at a store, but by the time you have enough money to afford a sword, you'll probably have killed somebody with one. So the weapons are a negative in terms of the economy, but you will be buying as many jewels, vials, and totems as you can get a hold of. Combined with buying food, this will keep your wealth rather tight, which means the economy works, although it's nothing special. It would probably work a little better if we could buy food and take it with us instead of starving for 60% of the game. Not a fan of the starving Julian walking around as if he's drunk, especially in this forest. Family Computing, April 1988. If you think fairy tales are just for kids, this game will change your mind. You can't find the missing talisman unless the king is willing to help, but until you rescue his daughter, he won't know you exist. The princess is locked in an inaccessible tower. You could fly there, but the swan who could help you is on an island, and you can't swim. Get the idea? Fairy tales may be for kids, but fairy tale adventure has been known to force even hardened adult gamers to their knees to beg for hints. The fairy tale adventure is just about everything you can ask for in a game. It's attractive. Music turns the game into an animated film. It's challenging. Figuring out what to do with what you've found is almost as tricky as deciding what to do first and where to go next. Best of all, it's fun. And that's the bottom line when it comes to games. Tan A. Summers. Computer Gaming World, February 88. From Roy Wagner, the Fairy Tale Adventure is a simplified role-playing game with a very natural user interface. It is simplified to the game player's advantage, but does not cause any significant loss in gameplay value. As a graphic RPG adventure, it shows some similarities to the early classic Temple of Apache and the Watershed Ultima series, but graphics and play action go far beyond these games. The review then goes on to become a full 4-page walkthrough of the entire game, but we shall be going to the end. This game is very impressive and a worthy addition to the games library of any computer adventure. It is very playable, an excellent value for its price, and there will likely be a sequel available sometime this summer. Not so much on that last part. So the bosses are alright, not particularly challenging if you're already beefed up like I am, though they can suck a lot of energy out of you. Some may require an item in order to become vulnerable. The witch there had to have the sunstone used on her. And it genuinely had me on the edge of my seat wondering what that light source coming my way was going to do to me. And I really enjoyed the final boss. There was quite a bit of back and forth that went on. Even though I still won on the first attempt, that one happened to be a lot of fun for me. Even though it's not a game about the fighting, it was still nice to see a change from all of the race and the skeletons coming your way. When it comes to transportation, I feel the game has a great progression. We spend a nice chunk of the game just walking. We'll find the turtle, and then we can travel over the water. We have the monoliths, which provide fast travel to another monolith depending on the direction you are facing. And finally, we get the one that will put the biggest smile on your face, the swan. There's simply no feeling which approaches the freedom of flying around an RPG. It's really breathtaking to see something like this in a game from 1987. Might Magic 2 had flying in it. You know how that one worked? You type in fly to area D4, X12, Y7, and you instantly appear there. This is the perfect reward for getting this far. The freedom to just go wherever you want. Coming back to Computer Gaming World, October 1988, where the readers placed the Fairy Tale Adventure as the 8th best adventure/action game, with a score of 7.32. October of 1991, where the magazine takes a break from the computer world, diving into the console market, the Sega Genesis version of the Fairy Tale Adventure. This appearance is an especially happy event. This landmark game was quite unlike anything the computer gaming world had seen or heard when Microillusions released it for the Amiga in 1987, and its considerable charm and style are almost fully intact on the Genesis in 1991. And that's a sentiment I would mostly agree with. I would imagine there are people who think the Genesis version is the definitive edition of the game, and I would hear them out on that opinion. I would not agree with them, but I'd listen, and I think we could have a respectful back and forth, and I don't always feel that way about some people's opinions. For me, it doesn't quite match the Amiga. Number one, they took the 320 by 200 graphics of the original Amiga version and threw it into the 320 by 224 resolution of the Genesis. And much like playing this on a PAL Amiga, which has a 320 by 256 resolution, when you put 320 by 200 inside of a higher resolution, the result is stretched graphics. It doesn't look how it's supposed to look. Controls definitely take some getting used to. The music, while very well done for the Genesis FM variety, certainly does not match the Amiga. And the big one is probably the fact that it uses a very long password system to save your progress instead of a battery or a little flash cart. Truly unacceptable for a game of this size not to have some kind of built-in save mechanism instead of a password. But what speaks a lot for the Genesis version is that when I was collecting footage for the DOS and Commodore 64 versions, I walked around for a bit. For the Genesis, I actually played the game. I made my way to the Turtle and the Crystal Palace. I didn't finish the game, but I did play it. You would not be going wrong playing either the Amiga or Genesis versions of the Fairy Tale adventure. Speaking of that wonderful Amiga music for a computer game in 1987 to have a full game soundtrack. Amazing. Of course, the quality of the musical sound coming from the Amiga is wonderful. I kind of wish that the indoor music, when you first enter a building, I wish the volume of that was a little lower, but it does sound good. I think I prefer some of the songs to be a little longer, but they're definitely catchy. You wouldn't start regularly seeing full game soundtracks for a computer RPG until the 90s. And for that, another noteworthy achievement. Sound effects, not many, but what's there is good. One more from Computer Gaming World, November 1996, the 150 best games of all time. Number 63 of 150, Fairy Tale Adventure. Microillusions XX, that would be 1987. Real-time adventure at its Amiga best. There is a rumored update. Cross your fingers. Byte, September 1987. The game of the month is Fairy Tale Adventure for the Amiga. January of 88, Commodore Magazine. Fairy Tale does not have the best graphics, sound, or animation of all Amiga games, but the combined effect of all three is matched by perhaps no other game on the Amiga market today. I strongly suggest that you take a look at Fairy Tale for yourself and see what I mean. Despite the problems that still exist with this game, I'm sure that you will feel that you will be getting your money's worth. Well, I'd imagine so, because in December of 1988, they placed it as one of the best adventure/fantasy games, while saying that it's not just another play-alike whose author was content to emulate the style of Ultima or Wizardry. An early look at the game from September 1986 in Amiga World, where there was an advertisement for the game coming this holiday season. Now, I don't think it was actually released in 1986. Microillusions liked advertising games before they were released, in some cases never releasing them. I think this is an example. A very nice title screen, though, which does not appear in the actual game. But by this May issue of Amiga World, in this full-page ad, I feel that it was actually out at this point. The review for Amiga World would come in November of 87. In the magical land of Holm, three brothers set out one at a time to defeat an evil necromancer and recover a magic talisman, making the kingdom safe once again. Sound familiar? Well, no one said you had to have a killer storyline to make an enjoyable game. The graphics and scrolling are very good aerial views. The sound is good. The music isn't bad, but gets annoying after a few hours. The best feature of the Fairy Tale Adventure is the size of the playmap. It's gigantic. The Fairy Tale Adventure is a good game. It's not earth-shattering, mentally provocative, or terribly fast-paced. It is well-constructed, has above-average sound and graphics, and the size of the play area is enough to keep you interested for quite a while, even if you never find the necromancer. $49.95, Microillusions, 17408 Chatsworth Street, Granada Hills, California, from G. Wright. And like Commodore Magazine, Amiga World's lukewarm review of the game was followed by a placement in a top of list. Top 40 all-time Amiga games. Happy holidays for Microillusions. And ranking as the 21st best Amiga game of all time, Fairy Tale Adventure is a giant-scale adventure game where you wander through the countryside gathering keys, treasures, weapons, and information. You are presented with a marvelous scrolling aerial view by which you explore caves, castles, deserts, forests, and mazes, all filled with numerous villains trying to kill you. As you progress through the land, you gain experience and your skills improve. Fairy Tale Adventure boasts over 17,000 screens. Even if you never win the game, you should enjoy the wandering. And yes, I feel this game does deserve placement on an intellectual best of list. It is certainly one of the best Amiga games of all time. It is an Amiga original. It is an early Amiga game. And on the grander scale, the story of games like Diablo are often traced back to games like Times of Lore or The Legend of Zelda. Well, I think the fairy tale adventure deserves to be spoken about a little more when you talk about those ones. And here with the Commodore 64, we will have shown off all versions of this game. And the 8-bit Commodore 64 kicking the butt of DOS with page animations. Not that it's surprising to me, I almost always prefer the Commodore 64 version to an EGA DOS game. It's never that this game looks worse on the Commodore 64, it's that it looks different. On DOS, that is how it is. It looks worse than the Amiga. But the 64 always has style. Now there is significant disk loading, which I've cut out a lot of that, and the keyboard controls for picking things up and using items is very awkward. But I'd be very interested in playing this version just to check out all the little differences. This one is definitely charming. And may I just say that I loved and was very surprised by this final area. Here we take a brief break from the combat before we enter the final battle, get serenaded with some triumphant music, and show off our dexterity with our joystick. I had a lot of fun here. Quickly, I'd like to get some British perspective. They got the game over a year later, June-July 1988, your Amiga. Although not perfect by any means, Fairy Tail offers a lot of game for the money, and if you enjoy this type of game, then I don't think that you will be disappointed. Amiga Computing, June 89. Micro Illusions is not well known in the UK, except for what has become a classic Amiga role-playing game, Fairy Tail Adventure. Fairy Tail is not an easy adventure to get into quickly, addictive once you get the hang of it, and there is certainly plenty to explore. 81% a classic. The Games Machine, August 88. £100 Amiga price cut heralds war with ST. Home is where the heart is. The Fairy Tail Adventure had been an expensive import, but now Mediagenic have taken over distribution, the price has become more reasonable. While no longer state-of-the-art nor quite as atmospheric as Where Time Stood Still, this remains an intriguing graphic, virtually arcade adventure that is hardly dated. £29, 99 pence, and a score of 79%. So the vast majority of the reviews from back in the day thought this was an all-time classic. A few wanted to point out its flaws while still acknowledging its greatness. And there was only one review, which was from Britain, that was more critical of the game, and it's not being shown here because it was written terribly. I don't care if you disagree with me, I will take you on, but when you're inventing paragraphs of drab story about billy goat pies, that person's opinion is not one I feel is worth considering. Well, the game was a moderate financial success according to Talon and a critical darling. It charted in best ofs from the time period and was still being talked about a decade later as one of the best games of all time. I feel that these days it's a game which deserves to be talked about way more than it actually is. Here in America, it came out before Zelda. That is significant. Push through the game's early difficulties and it turns into a ride, quite literally, with the Swan. Wondrous exploration in a non-linear open-world setting where you figure it out. There are issues, I've mentioned some, but none of them detract from the experience. An imperfect masterpiece is still a masterpiece, one of the best Amiga games of all time. And a beautiful ending for a beautiful game. I hope you'll check out my written review at shot97retro.blogspot.com. Thanks to Stitching Phoenix for requesting this game many years ago, as well as Octotiggy for being another appreciator of this game. We're going to point you to a video they did for this one, which I think you'll enjoy. You can also check out my reviews for King's Bounty, Discovery, and A-Train. Leave a like or comment if you enjoyed, and I will see you all later. Goodbye.